Satan is good. Satan is our pal. I want to kill everyone. Satan is good. Satan is our pal.
What you are currently hearing is an approximation of Soviet Psychotronics, fed through an American filter, to sing the battle hymn of the Republic. Thanks, Russian military choir. We knew you'd see the light. Sooner or later, one way or another. Excuse me. Soviet Psychotronics. They're in your brain. They're in my brain. They've certainly been in my brain the last several months. This is a close approximation to what it sounds like, I imagine, according to some of the victim complaints that I've read, which this is getting off light, to say the least. So yeah, that's our intro today. Hello, welcome. Where to start? Okay, welcome to the show. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. I'm your host, Michael Luck. If you've never listened to the show before, I'd say that's about par for the course for usual intros. I've been trying to change it up on each intro, so no theme song yet, but it's in the ether, just waiting to be plucked out sooner or later. Once again, welcome to the show. If you've never listened before, this is a show where we usually take individuals' biographies, weirdos from history, and try to parse through the random weird shit that they've said and see if there's any nuggets of gold in there. Every quote-unquote crazy person has at least said something that's useful, that's worth taking a look at and making note of. Various figures, such as Wilhelm Reich, various occultists through history, etc. People who would normally be labeled by society at large as quote-unquote crazy, or a kook, or a crank, or, if you're willing to be generous, an iconoclast. Someone who's said some very strange things, but even a quote-unquote crazy person has something of note to say. And that's kind of where we centralize the main theme of this show. But as I've stated before in other episodes, I'm trying to break out of just doing biographies and just looking at various strange portions of history, strange topics, notions, concepts, etc., and parse out what's weird, definitely, but see if there's any truth to it or usefulness, etc. And I've been just haunch deep in discussions and books and readings of Soviet-era parapsychology, except they didn't call it parapsychology because they are a Marxist materialist. That's the party line. So none of that God shit. No spirituality, nothing there. So they called it psychotronics because, as Marxist materialists, they viewed the spiritual or spiritual powers, what we in the quote-unquote West would call things like ESP, psychic powers, etc. They deemed this as an extension of human physiology. Much the same for China, too, who we'll get into down the road in a not-too-distant future. But today is the oh boy, this is the this is the hot steaming vodka potato sauce load of Soviet psychotronics that we're going to get into. So yeah, I've got some weirdness. My God, just I can't even begin to explain. So yeah, before we jump into all of the Soviet psychotronic strangeness, let's real quick hear a word from our sponsors. You know, as an American, and not just an American, but a patriotic American, you can be damn sure that I am either one of two things: drinking and drunk, or hungover. Because it's my duty as an American to celebrate my freedoms. But you know what? It's hard to celebrate with a hangover. But luckily, there's an American product for American people and anyone else who wants to try it because we're Americans and we're good like that. It's called Liqueur, Liquure. Liqueur gummies combine DHM, milk thistle, B vitamins, and ginger root to help your body recover after a night of patriotic drinking. They fight fatigue, nausea, and dehydration, so you wake up feeling refreshed. Try them for faster recovery, to be a better American, or America-friendly across the Atlantic and Pacific and other oceans I'm told exist on either side of us. Enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON, I-C-O-N, at liqueur.com, Liquure, for 20% off any product. Thank you, and jobless America. Boy! You know, as an American patriot, I enjoy freedom. Freedom, freedom, freedom. Like freedom of oversight from the people I do these advertisements for. I'm not making any money, so who gives I mean, poop. Who gives a poop? But you know what? I do enjoy our Shimmerwood beverages. Oh, that's right. Dramatic upsweep. Shimmerwood beverages are an award-winning CBD seltzer that combines full-spectrum CBD with natural fruit shrubs, delivering a refreshing, stress-relieving drink that eases tension and promotes patriotic relaxation. Enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON, I-C-O-N, at shimmerwood.com for 30% off any product. Be a better patriot. Enjoy Shimmerwood's fantastic, award-winning, delicious CBD seltzers, or the terrorists win. Jobless America. Boy! 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 Shimmerwood.com. Whoa. Might have burned a bridge in that one. Nah, it's fine. It's fine. Drink the stuff. Somebody buy something. God damn it. Okay, this is the real me talking now. I mean, it's always me. I promise I am not an AI. I promise America and the world that I am not an AI. Anywho, so Soviet Psychotronics, man, this shit is insane. And you know what the weirdest part of all of it is that most of it, there's no real proof. There's hardly any proof that any of this, I mean, there were studies done. Oh, there was many millions and billions of rubles spent on research. But what of the efficacy? What of the applications in the real world? Well, just shy of programming you through television, radio, social media, not much. But when you got all that stuff, it's a lot easier to brainwash people. And people don't, you know, it's like, no, I need my Facebook. I need my click-clacks and ding-dongs, to quote Mr. Lowry. All the various bullshit, the socials that you waste time on, but get a and thanks for listening, by the way. On Spotify, on YouTube, on all the platforms. Anyways, you get your little serotonin boost when you get a like or a comment or whatever. Like and subscribe. But yeah, this is I would not be surprised if everything that they learn through these millions and billions of dollars of research application is filtered in to the use of social media. Now, according to the book Homo Sovieticus by, oh, what's this author's name? One second, let me find the author's name. Where are you? Vladimir Veliminsky. Son of a bitch. Where is he? I'll insert it later. Something Stanislav? I forget. Anyways, according to him, much of what was found was incorporated into the use of media. So there's, as far as we know, no real mind control technology, but that's where you'll hear a different story from some of the victims. Now, I don't want to belittle or make light of whatever it is these people are going through, because some of it sounds very fucking harrowing. It sounds downright diabolical. Whatever is happening to these people, it may not be Soviet psychotronics. It could be a mental health issue that pre-existed. I don't know, but whatever it is they're going through, I hope that if someone else can be held accountable, that they are brought to justice. Because if there's one goddess I venerate above all others, it's Lady Justice. So more power to you folks. We'll get into one guy specifically later. He's the head of a group, I believe, called Zombie, Z-O-M-B-I, that is specifically centered around the search for justice for victims of psychotronic machinery, equipment, technology, etc. That started during the Soviet era. He is Russian, and various people outside of Soviet Russia.
When I came to America from Russia, I discovered many wonderful things, like blue jeans, unopened mail, and light beer from Miller.
So this is a global problem, and I mean, we know there's something to it because we've seen the reports of Havana syndrome. So very likely, the most effective weaponry, we'll say military applications, because not all of it seems like weaponry, and a lot of it, the search came out through, the later stuff, the later technological applications seem to have come through the search for non-lethal weaponry. But if you've looked at the military applications in the West, America specifically, of various technologies that came out of quote-unquote non-lethal weaponry, a lot of it sounds, I don't know, I'm not going to say preferable. I'm not going to say death is preferable, because that would be a ridiculous statement, but...
What a country, all right!
Some of the long-term effects of what this stuff does, it's just really bad. It's up there with, like, Agent Orange and shit like that. Like, I don't know. It's no way to live, if you can call that living. So, anywho, let's get into my partially scripted material here. So, the story starts off with a man named Gabor Mihaly Toth, a Hungarian journalist who is often cited as a pivotal moment in the West's awareness of alleged Soviet psychotronic research. He is at the center of this moment. In the early 90s, Toth reportedly defected from Hungary to Austria, carrying with him a collection of documents that detail the Soviet Union's experiments with psychotronic weapons, devices purportedly capable of influencing human consciousness through electromagnetic fields and other means. These documents, which Toth claimed to have obtained from sources within the Soviet scientific community, included technical schematics, research papers, and first-hand accounts of experiments involving mind control and behavioral manipulation. I'm not even going to get into the bunny rabbits. What happened to those fucking poor bunny rabbits? Jesus!
Look at the bunny, Lenny.
The bunny!
Makes me sick. Upon reaching the West, Toth shared his findings with various intelligence agencies and journalists, sparking a wave of interest and concern among Western governments and the public. His revelations were featured in several international media outlets, including Le Monde Diplomatique, Der Spiegel, The Looking Glass, and the New York Times. I think I've heard of that periodical, that so-called periodical, the New York Times. The reports painted a chilling picture of a covert Soviet program aimed at developing non-lethal weapons for psychological warfare. There it is, psychological warfare. We are locked in World War IV? What are we at now? It's being fought right now. It's going on right now. This psychological warfare has been taking place since, I'd say, post-World War II. We've been knee-deep in it. It's been going on. We're in it. We are engaged right now. You might not be aware of it, but it's like G.I. Joe says, knowing is half the hassle. So the authenticity of Toth's documents have been the subject of controversy. Do tell. Some experts argued that the materials he presented were fabricated or exaggerated. Possibly as part of a disinformation campaign, possibly as part of psychological warfare. See? Levels. 4D chess. Fuck that, bro. 6D. I got all the Ds you need. That's how many dimensions of 4D chess we're playing. Others contend that while the documents may have been genuine, they represent only a small fraction of the broader Soviet research into psychotronics, much of which remains classified or lost to history. Now, the fact that most of these documents, especially on the Soviet side, some of my main sources are declassified CIA documents, but on the Soviet side, and we all know how they are with record keeping, I mean, come on. But a lot of it is still very, very much under lock and key. So despite the debate over the veracity of TOSS disclosures, they undeniably brought the topic of psychotronic weapons into the oculus populi, the public eye. If you want to be fancy and Latin about it, I like to call it the oc-pop. No, I don't. I never say that.
Bro.
So it influenced subsequent investigations and discussions about the ethical implications of such technologies. In the years following TOSS revelations, the term psychotronic gained traction in both scientific and popular discourse. While mainstream science remains skeptical of the claims associated with psychotronic weapons, the subject continues to intrigue those interested in the intersections of technology, psychology, and power.
Bro.
It's the power. First you get the psychotronic weaponry, then you get the women. Anyways, TOSS' story serves as a reminder of the complexities and uncertainties that often surround covert scientific research and the challenges in discerning fact from fiction in the realm of intelligence and technology. Now, I will say, as a caveat, as an add-in to this, that the Soviets, let's say 70s to 80s era, some of the scientists have actually been very forthcoming with what they've found, and there's been exchanges between largely Hal Puthoff and the remote viewing group. Some of their representatives have attended international conferences at which Soviet scientists also attended, and various other Eastern Bloc scientists. This was documented. This is known. There's fucking minutes of the meetings. So I do believe there's been more than one of these sort of workshops where all these various scientists, both East and West, however you want to split it up, they've both attended. So looking at the history of this. Now, I don't know if you listened to the last episode, Red Shambhala, where I accidentally posted or recorded the same segment twice because my brain was fried at the moment. But this goes back as far as that stuff. Like, we're talking like 1920s. And it starts off with a gentleman named Vladimir Bekhterev, born 1857, died 1927, and the institute he headed up. You'll never guess the name of this institute. It has to do with the brain. It's an institute. Any guesses? Yes, that's right. The Brain Institute. Good job. The Brain Institute. He was a neurologist slash physiologist who founded the Brain Institute. He ran hypnosis and reflexology programs and tolerated investigations. These were tolerated at the time of quote unquote thought transference, which sets the precedent, I suppose you could call it, for governmental investigation into these concepts. Now, pretty much everything, once the Bolsheviks took over and then everything got red as fuck in Russia from that point on until the fall of the Berlin Wall, pretty much all scientific investigation was funded by the state. Now, Bekhterev was a pioneering neurologist. He founded the Brain Institute in Petrograd. Though he was a rationalist scientist, he explored parapsychology, keeping in mind they don't use that word, and hypnosis as tools for understanding the unconscious and human suggestion. His interest in quote-unquote collective psychology, this was a big one for him, and I think, I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably the people who were funding him were really into this, seeing as how Alexander Barchenko and Gleb Boki, the guys who first started doing the sort of pre-Soviet X-Files for Russia, one of their major investigations was into mass hysteria, specifically a culture-bound syndrome of mass hysteria that was affecting the indigenous Sami people, which they called the Call of the North Star. And they noticed that when people were afflicted by this mass hysteria, that in this certain state, they were very, very, very susceptible to issued verbal commands, even if it meant like hurting them or it was physically impossible. Like they would tell someone, climb to the roof, and they'd do it. Chop off your toe, they'd do it. Allegedly. This is, you know, you have to take a lot of this with a shot of penicillin, because some of it, you know, we're talking about an age of disinformation, psychological warfare, etc. So the veracity of what we're being told needs to be examined. Always consider the source. It's one of the main things I like to preach here, if I preach at all. Consider the source of the information. What do they gain? Cui bono? Moving on. So, his interest in collective psychology and psychic energy put him at the edge of occultism. And later Soviet Psi researchers would cite him as a precursor to everything they were doing. His suspicious death, after diagnosing Stalin as quote-unquote paranoid, you don't say, it fed into legends of him being silenced due to quote-unquote forbidden science. So there's a lot of mythology around his death, but to call Stalin paranoid, probably not good for the career. Next up after him, you've got a fellow by the name of Leonid Vassiliev, 1891-1966. He was Bekhtcherev's disciple. By the way, Bekhterev also arch rivals with Pavlov. You know, Pavlovian response training. There's a lot of experiments conducted with dogs to varying degrees, switching brains, sewing brains and heads onto other bodies. But there were lots of, you know, psychological experiments done with dogs as well. And Bekhterev fucking hated Pavlov. Don't know why. Couldn't find anything about it. I guess they were just not seeing eye to eye scientifically. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe Pavlov double dipped a chip at a party.
Bro.
Who knows? It's crazy how these people, like, just the human personality shine through. No matter if you've got some monolithic Soviet governmental machine marching on, just a juggernaut crushing all in its path, you're still going to have to deal with office politics, etc. So Vassiliev was Bekhtcherev's disciple. He was a physiologist and, for our purposes, a parapsychologist. Vassiliev became one of the Soviet Union's most prominent psi researchers. Working at Leningrad University, he carried out experiments on telepathy and quote-unquote biological radio. This was a term that they like to use a lot. Once again, Marxist materialism. They framed all of these abilities, or suspected, quote-unquote, potential abilities of the human mind as physiological extensions. To sort of give a brief look into a future topic, like when we discussed China, China referred to these as extraordinary human capabilities. So this is all grounded in the potentials of the human body and mind. This is it's like the human potential movement in America that popped up in the 60s, but before that, like these guys were doing it before it was cool. So though strictly couched in scientific language, as noted, his research on thought transmission and hypnosis directly overlapped with occult traditions of clairvoyance and psychic projection. The NKVD, and later the KGB, monitored and occasionally sponsored his work as part of Psychotronics projects. Scientific psychological stream post-1917, this takes Bekhterev and the Brain Institute, as well as Bekhtcherev's Petrograd-Leningrad Brain Institute. They ran hypnosis/suggestion work and briefly hosted a 1922 commission probing quote-unquote parapsychology problems. And this made Psi a more or less mainstream, for lack of a better word, socially acceptable, easy to discuss topic inside scientifically based physiology and psychology, and not just people at coffee shops like banging bongos or whatever. So The standard bearer would eventually become Leonid L. Vasilyev, Bekhtcherev's disciple, and he became the USSR's leading laboratory figure for quote-unquote mental suggestion at a distance, eventually heading the Leningrad University work and later a dedicated lab, which was intermittently shut down several times depending on who was in charge or which way the political winds were blowing. He explicitly traces the line from Bekhtcherev's circle in the 1930s to the main hardcore, like, central 1960s Soviet psychotronics research. There's several other important figures we've got here. I'm going to give you the key players, but those are the guys that go all the way back to the 1920s. And it's weird that people often poo-poo on parapsychology research, even though we've got, like, roughly 150 years of this shit going on. Like, laboratories, committed, central, redoable foundations, and incidents, like stuff that has been proven in laboratory settings. I think a lot of it largely has to do, the problem with why no one really hears about any of the findings is that it's all depends on, once again, consider the source. Who's telling it? Who needs funding? Who's in charge of the government that was funding these programs or research? But there have been some pretty crazy finds. So some of the other people in charge include Vlail Petrovich Kaznachev, or VP Kaznachev, Vice President Kaznachev. Biophysics, non-chemical cell-to-cell communication was his whole bag, baby. He led work on purported non-chemical or non-contact, no physical contact, communication between cell cultures. His program is one of the better documented Soviet attempts to show biological, quote-unquote, information transfer without standard biochemical mechanisms, i.e. the human body, etc. Is important for later biophoton and biofield literature, which if you know your weird, hippy-dippy, new agey pseudoscience, you might already have an inkling as to what that entails. So next up, we've got Gennady Sergeyev. I'm just going to call him G. Sergeyev. He's a Leningrad researcher. He mostly looked into psychometry and psychokinetic studies. Now, for those who are unaware, psychometry is the ability to touch an object and sort of read its history, like who's touched it, what happened around this thing, basically reading the psychic imprints that have been, it's like reading the background radiation of an object, basically, but it's all the occult, or excuse me, all of the occurrences that have taken place around it. And then psychokinetics is the ability to move objects with the mind, etc. So Sergeyev is often cited as the Leningrad experimenter who ran systematic lab work on a woman named Nina Kulagina. It's a big part of this, at least in the public eye. And other psychokinetic claimants. There was a lot of people, like, basically the Soviet government said, ran ads in various periodicals, on the radio, on the TV, or not the TV so much, but on the radio and publications saying, hey, do you have psychic powers? And come on down, we'll check you out. It's for the good of the nation. It's for Mother Russia. So a lot of people came through, and Miss Kulagina, or Mrs. Old Nina, we'll call her. Nina came through and proved to be one of the bigger stars. But Sergeyev, his name appears repeatedly in Western intelligence summaries. Now, Nina, or Ninel Kulagina, I'm going to go with Nina. It sounds more American. She was a psychic, quote-unquote, / psychokinetics claimant. She's probably the best-known Soviet psychokinesis claimant. She was filmed moving small objects, compass needles, separating egg yolks in water, etc. She was studied in Leningrad labs. There's footage and lab reports that exist there's very rigorous skeptical replications that were never settled on her abilities. That's important because she was a publicly documented case that the Western analysts tracked. She's probably the best known because there's footage of her doing various things. Now, there's claims that what she's been able to do has been reproduced in laboratory settings over and over and over. Once again, we don't know. It's likely just we're going to have to fall back on propaganda for this one. One of the, however, more outrageous Western debunkings, quote unquote, I've heard to explain her abilities is that supposedly the reason she was able to move ping pong balls under a glass and separate egg yolks, etc., is because, according to one Western scientist, she was able to secrete some sort of film, some chemical film on her hands that, like, in the instance of, say, like, moving her hand and making a ping pong ball, like, move ahead of it, like she was pushing it, without touching it, basically. This Western scientist, I forget who it was, tried to say that she secreted some film that had its own weird chemical magnetic properties to it, which also, that doesn't sound like a debunking. That just sounds like another weird superpower. So, I don't know. There's a lot of stories about her. We'll get into some of the weirder ones down the road. But next up, you've got Rosa Kuleshova. She was studied for dermo-optical perception, a.k.a. skin vision, which sounds like Skinamax. It was the first thing I thought, but this is not as saucy. Although, I got a lot of plot spoiling in my mind. This is a good couple of movies. Another series, volume 28 of Skin Vision. Anyways, famous 1960s subject who reportedly read print and identified colors by touch while blindfolded. She stimulated a wave of Soviet study into quote-unquote eyeless sight, which they also called biointroscopy or dermo-optical perception. This was also big in China. It was one of the big things they looked into. But basically, effects dropped under stricter controls when the experiments are real. Or the experiments are real and they're widely reported, but it's essentially putting on a blindfold, putting a piece of paper up to your head, and doing the Johnny Carson bits. Dippity-doo. Dippity-doo. What you find on your dippity first thing in the morning. Ho-ho! Next up, you've got Simeon and Valentina Kirlian. This is what I was alluding to earlier. Kirlian photography, or corona discharge imaging. This was invented, or they invented, the high-voltage photographic technique that yields the glowing corona. Image is often presented as biological aura. So, the Kirlian photography. The imaging effect is physically real. It's a coronal discharge, even if paranormal interpretations are not. The Kirlian's work entered both legitimate imaging and fringe aura claims. Now, Kirlian photography is a thing. It does exist, and it can be, replicated over and over. But what does it mean? No one fucking knows. I've heard that there's a picture of a half of a leaf that's fairly famous. If you look at all this Kirlian aura stuff, that they cut the leaf in half and it still had the aura. There's a lot of questions about that. Although I have seen some pretty tripped out Kirlian aura photography of various people. Probably one of the ones that sticks with me the most. I've been trying to find it again and again and again because it was in a video. It was a photo in a video I found on YouTube of a woman who was said to be a meth addict. And she was surrounded by two separate, spirit auras or whatever that had their own, scary fucking demon faces in them or whatever. Now, I'm not attaching any belief or what legitimacy to this. It's just one of the cooler pictures that stuck out. That's all I'll say. If I can find it, I'll post it up on YouTube or whatever. Next up, we've got Nikolai Alexandrovich Kozyrev. He's probably one of the more modern, well-known people. He's an astrophysicist whose ideas fed into the Kozyrev mirror lore. Now, he's a respected astronomer, proposed controversial ideas about the nature of time. Later, his followers built Kozyrev mirrors and used his name to justify experiments that fringe circles tied into psychotronics / torsion claims. See the word torsion fields a lot. I have as little idea as to what this means. I think the actual people involved do,
Bro.
but we'll get into a little bit more of that later. So Kozyrev himself he's a documented scientist. He's a real guy. The mirrors are a later contested development of his. I've wanted to build one of these because, like, the Y-Files does a really good episode covering them. This is something that's shown up again and again in various fringe and conspiracy circles, but allegedly these Kozyrev mirrors, it's kind of like the remote viewing is brought to you. It's sort of something that, I guess, augments or enhances the ability of the remote viewer, except that these mirrors are able, it's a two-way street. So people have talked about encountering time travelers, aliens, spirits, etc., non-human intelligences, whatever you want to call it, unless they're a quote-unquote time traveler. I don't know, or that's what people assume, I guess. But these Kozyrev mirrors show up in fringe and conspiratorial circles, etc. So they're pretty well known. I think I've got a little bit more on those later as well. And then we've got Igor, the scientist is named Igor this time.
Don't you know that might make me very angry now? I will do terrible, horrible things to you.
Igor V. Smirnov. Insert vodka joke. He was into psychotechnology and probably one of the scarier words I've heard and see pop up in all of this research, psychocorrection. We'll get into that as well. He ran the Psychotechnology / Institute of Psychocorrection programs in the 1990s. I'm cheating a little bit getting outside of Soviet, but a lot of the findings and stuff that came out of these millions and millions of rubles state-funded research into this stuff kind of went into the private sector. So, you know, various corporations, a lot of this stuff was sold because when the Soviet Union fell, they had a fire sale in which various countries and other dubious organizations and individuals bought, you know, surplus, quote-unquote surplus military gear, concepts that were, what do you call it, copyrighted, I guess, like, you know, the patents. They bought the patents for stuff. So who knows what the fuck's going on with all that, but basically there's a huge international dispersal of a lot of this stuff, allegedly, so who knows who's got what. And then there's Anatoly M. Kasparovsky. Anatoly
Bro.
Kasparovsky. He was into televised mass healing and mass hypnosis. He was a public figure. He's a psychiatrist / performer who in 1989 gave televised healing / hypnosis sessions to millions. He was often framed by commentators as an attempt at mass psychomanipulation during perestroika. Perestroika was for those who don't know, the ease into capitalism, etc., under Gorbachev. Here's a little ditty from history. People around my age, the 40-ish crowd, may know this, but I remember a lot of people saying that Mikhail Gorbachev, who was he was the top dude, top dog during the time that the Soviet Union was being dismantled. He had a huge birthmark on his head. I remember so many people, fucking idiots, saying that it was the mark of the beast, that he was the Antichrist and shit like that. I don't know. I grew up in the South where a lot of people say and think such things, so whatever. He was not a lab scientist, but a high-profile public psychic / therapist, and he highlights the sort of late Soviet intersection of media and suggestion. Now, the book I mentioned earlier, Homo Sovieticus, the author of that book contends that pretty much all the useful shit that was found through all this psychotronics research has been applied to the media, specifically. The media, i.e. television, radio, much to a lesser extent today, but at the time, still radio. Radio and and print media, all basically mass media, was what was more or less weaponized, if you want to, for lack of a better term. So there's that to contend with as well. And then we've got Pavel Garyaev, who is into wave genetics, quote-unquote wave genetics. A DNA wave. His claims is post-Soviet fringe, but it has roots in the Soviet laboratory work. Phantom DNA, quote-unquote. Phantom DNA effects. Like, this this included like laser research, because fucking the 1980s was all about some lasers. This work was controversial and largely outside mainstream biology, but part of the lineage of Soviet-era unconventional biophysics. That's another phrase that shows up in both Soviet and Chinese research into all this stuff. Unconventional biophysics. Biophysics in general. It's another big word that shows up. So this is actually one of the words, and I'm not the most scientifically inclined cat. I'll have to say that out front. So anyone who listens, who maybe knows a little more about all this stuff, please enlighten me. But when I see the word biophysics, that's what I'm starting to think there's some more like real shit going on, because biophysics, once again, it clamps into the whole, what do you call it? Like all these abilities or human potential abilities intersect at as physiological. These are based in the body. It's not a spiritual thing. This is stuff that like in our genetic programming that already exists, like our potential, essentially. So yeah, this later morphed into molecular / laser-based claims. I'm not sure what laser-based claims means, but it sounds like something that I hope your lawyer never brings up in your defense, because you will go to jail. It's useful to track because it shows how some of the Soviet researchers migrated into more novel post-Soviet fringe programs. Like, and once again, like, keep in mind also psychological warfare. A big part of psychological warfare is the weaponization and usage of things like fringe science and conspiracy theories. Anyone who is super into Tartaria, I'm sorry if you're super into Tartaria stuff, but I'm pretty sure that that's a weaponized form. I mean, a lot of that, I know it's like got phantom time missing from our vast calendars, etc. But I don't know. It gets to ridiculous points where I've seen people in front of buildings like, how'd they make that? How'd they make that in the last 100 years? That's bullshit. So, I don't know. Just, it's whatever. The fact that this empire that's vast and done for is of Russian origin, that kind of tells me that maybe there's a little Alex Jones voice.
I know, I get it, I killed them.
Finally, probably one of the most well-known, if you're talking Russia and psychics, probably the most well-known outside of Nina, as mentioned before, would be Wolf Grigorievich Messing, or Wolf Messing. He's a showman, a telepath, quote-unquote telepath, and an early Soviet celebrity. He was a stage mentalist, stealth-styled telepath, whose legend and claims to have contact with Soviet leaders. Like, he was to the tippy top. He hung out with Stalin and shit. So it feeds into the whole Soviet psychic folklore, widely discussed in memoirs and media. It's hard to separate his showmanship from real research, but he is historically important. There's actually a story about him. He was basically Stalin's pet psychic, for lack of a better term. But, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an American equivalent that you could hold him up to. Like, geez, who's a famous psychic? David Blaine or something. Like, he was Stalin's pet David Blaine.
No, David Blaine, no.
I'm taping a street magic special.
I don't know why, but I keep wanting to equate him with the ventriloquist guy.
Jeff
For some
Dunham.
reason. I'm a ventriloquist. So, Wolf Messing. Wolf Messing, there's a story about him hanging out with Stalin, and he's like, hey, Stalin, I gotta go. It was fun hanging out with you. But you know, I have psychic shit to do, so see you later. And Stalin's like, how'd you even get in the building? He's like, you don't have any passes or anything on? He's like, no, it's fine. I do all right. And he's like, Stalin's like, okay, that's concerning, but all right, I'll see you later. Have fun doing your psychic shit. And he walks out of the building, and nobody asks him for papers or whatever. And then later on, it turns out that he was apparently making all the soldiers think that he was Stalin. Like, he broadcasted into their mind that he was Stalin, so they didn't have to ask him for paperwork or anything. That's the story, at least. So, once again, shot of penicillin. Now, the main historical event that adds so much credence to all this stuff is the first conference on psychotronic research in Prague, 1973, and its proceedings. There's a key international meeting where Eastern Bloc psychotronic researchers presented and in which Western intelligence cataloged. There were Soviet labs and institutions mentioned repeatedly in declassified files, Leningrad State University labs, which were the aforementioned Vasilyev's successors. There's the Novosibirsk research groups, the A.S. Popov Radio and Technical Institute. A lot of these, like, radio and mass communications technologies institutes were big into this stuff. So that ought to tell you something. That's what I'm taking away from all this that I've looked into, is the overlap with mass media and telecommunications technology. It's very weird, very weird. There are various military and medical institutes that folded experimental work into defense projects. So basically, the outline of study from the 1920s to the late 1980s, it kind of looks like this. I put together like a rough skeleton, if you will, sort of a semi-official domains of parapsychology research, aka psychotronics. So these are the main subjects they were looking into. 1920s to 1980s. We've got telepathy and remote perception. These are classic ESP experiments, what's on the other side of the card, wavy lines, a pyramid, shock the guy with the kooky hair, etc. Including long-distance, quote-unquote, thought transmission trials from Leningrad to Sevastopol, from Moscow to Novosibirsk. Those were a couple of the places that had institutions looking into telepathy and remote perception, remote viewing, etc. as well. They had their own remote viewers as well. There are stories in the West from Western remote viewers of allegedly projecting their consciousness into certain institutes to try and find out some dope, some dirt, straight poop, find the skinny on what was going on over there, and being attacked by rat-faced monsters. Like, they'd see a normal human, and, they'd be like, okay, well, that's just a regular person. I don't need to worry about them because I am a remote viewer, and I'm here in spirit or brain ghost or whatever. I'm a projection. And these people would all of a sudden, like, become aware, these Soviet agents or whatever, become aware of a presence, and then all of a sudden, allegedly, according to these stories, they would turn rat-faced and, like, attack the psychic projection.
Come here! What did you see? What did you see? Dude, what was in there? What did you see? Come on.
A demon.
Okay, you scared the crap out of me, man.
There's like a little monster man running around in here.
And they'd have to like, whoa, pull out, like zoom back into their bodies and get out of there. So allegedly there were Soviet agents who were at least like trained guard dogs, attack dogs for remote viewers, according to the stories, according to the lore. So, yeah.
Bro.
Moving on, we've got psychotronics and bioenergetics. Bioenergetics is another term that keeps popping up in both the Soviet and Chinese parapsychology research. There's psychotronics and bioenergetics. Bioenergetics, like I said, it's just one of those terms that kept coming up, having to do with certain fields of study that's where I was like, okay, there might be something to some of this. Specifically, talking about China, they looked into like Qigong practices, martial arts, etc., and physically harnessing qi, whatever you want to call it, or gon, as Dr. Reich would probably call it, etc. But these were umbrella terms in the 60s to the 80s for studies of human energy fields, and often linked to Eastern Bloc bioplasma theories. So once again, this is an innate, inherent, paraphysical human energy fields, basically. And then you've got hypnosis and suggestion, which was, once again, this was like probably the number one thing that pulled them into this, that pulled the Russians, the Soviets, into this field of study to begin with. This was carried out in both military and medical labs, psychiatric institutes, focuses on potential for interrogation. Interrogation, control, and battlefield morale. Then you've got electromagnetic sensitivity. Now, this is the this is the one that's, I'm going to say, kind of the scariest, but not because of what they found, because of the effects of the mythology around these studies. Like, for anyone who's watched Better Call Saul, his brother, like, that's what I'm talking about. This is the tinfoil hat shit, basically. This is where it springs from. There's a whole just mythology around it. And this is also where, when you read some of the reports of people who are suffering from whatever it is, like, they're fucking hellish. They're bad. Like, so there are people who, whether this is the actual source of their pain and suffering, I do not know, but this is what can largely be attributed to, I guess. I'm trying to walk around this very diplomatically because people suffer from it. And I'm not trying to make light of their suffering, but it's also at the same time just, I don't know, what do we know, or actually what do we know that we don't know? So there's that once again as well. Like, how much can we take seriously out of government documents? Once again, question the source, cui bono. But this is mostly centered around research into whether humans could detect or emit weak electromagnetic fields. It's tied to radar and biological shielding studies. Next up, you've got psychokinesis, PK. This is less central, but still investigated. This is one of the more, like, dog and pony show things. This, once again, Nina Kulagina. I think that was her name, Nina Kulagina. We'll just call her Nina for now. Nina. She was like the one who was photographed and recorded most of the time, trying to move things with her mind. So objects moving under laboratory conditions tested with high-speed photography, quote unquote. You've got remote viewing, once again, extrasensory perception under operational conditions. EPUOC. I don't know if that was that's what they have in quotations. They had another name for it. I don't think that's the official term that they used. But by late Cold War era, studies paralleled the United States Stargate / Grill Flame, Gondola Wish, etc. All the various names under which the remote viewing programs went under. The KGB and the GRU had interest in battlefield or espionage applications of this, much like the United States and China as well. So there's applied healing and bioenergetics therapy, bioenergy healers, such as this one fella named Juna Davitashvili. Juna Davitashvili. DJUNA DAVITASHVILI. I heard this dude's a public figure, or semi-public. I think he's still around, but he's also sort of like a celebrity psychic of sorts, or was at the time. But he was studied at various state labs for potential medical applications. Like, this is seen in various, Southern, usually American, like, charismatic churches, etc. The laying on of hands, they call it. Sort of just a faith healing sort of thing. Or psychic surgeons all throughout South America. I wouldn't go that far, actually. But it's in the same vein of that kind of thought and just the human ability to heal through touch, etc. It delves more into complex behind the scenes, like energy fields. Once again, chi, ki, orgone, whatever you want to call it, odic energy, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think you get the idea. There's investigations into altered states and performance enhancement. This definitely means drugs. They had their own little MK Ultra thing going on. Soviet Union was kind of weird about drugs. Like in the public sphere, you could get into trouble for having drugs, especially dealing drugs. You were fucked. But on the most part, it seems like, I don't know, they were kind of cool with it. Like, just like, don't bring it out in the open, but whatever. But that's as far as, like, Joe 6-pack of vodka, a regular old Ivan or Nina off the street. Yeah. But government, this is their MK Ultra, and it seems to not be as wide in scope as America's was. Like, this is just a separate program into which altered states and performance enhancement through psychochemical substances was investigated. This was largely looking for applications into the battlefield, morale, things like that. The way that Nazis used meth. sort of the same thing. Not so much American, like, let's put all these soldiers on LSD and see what happens. Although I'm sure that took place in a lab setting at some point. And then, of course, a large part of all of this was due to space applications. There's actually claimed telepathic communication experiments between cosmonauts in orbit, though this is disputed, of course, as well as occult and esoteric margins integrated, like select Bolshevik individuals, Barchenko and Boki from last episode specifically, who earlier tried to merge occult traditions with science, providing a strange continuity from the 1920s mysticism to 1970s and 80s psychotronics. Once again, the space applications, you get into the whole cosmonauts thing. Like, I have to do a separate episode on the Russian cosmonauts, because there's a lot of, like, Russian UFOs and stuff like that. I'll probably do a future episode on, because there's so much other just, like, side weirdness on that. And then alleged, government contacts or government retrieval of crashed ships. And then various things that have happened with cosmonauts in space, on the ground. But allegedly, they were trying to build a sort of psychic network, a psychic friends network for the cosmonauts. And supposedly, there was a time, according to one source I've read, I don't know how true this is, but Philip K. Dick, famous famous neo-Gnostic science fiction writer, when he was having his whole weird, like, Valis/zebra incursion into his mind, this weird, I don't know, psychic meltdown incident he went through, there was a time when he was trying to figure out what was going on that he thought he was captured or somehow hacked into inadvertently between a psychic cosmonaut network. So he thought he was, like, accidentally intruding upon, thoughts and transmissions between these cosmonauts or whatever. Because allegedly there was some secret psychic network between cosmonauts. This is one of the main things that they wanted to establish, because it basically was a workaround for everything that they could basically imagine as acting as a outer space communications relay from Earth to space, essentially. So yeah, but once again, I'll have to do another dive into cosmonaut stuff later. There's all kinds of crazy shit. The lost cosmonauts. There's that audio footage, or is it footage? The audio recording of the woman burning up on re-entry. It's pretty fucked up. And then there's, like, sightings of aliens/angels on the space station. There's all this transhumanist stuff that we get into. And this stuff here also kind of verges on the realms of transhumanism, especially under the shield or idea, the concept of Russian cosmism. Like, it's sort of a precursor to transhumanist thought, and a lot of it has to do with Russian cosmonauts as to, like, the stepping stone to making humans able to essentially colonize space, etc. One particular, I don't know, section, we'll say, of some of the stuff I was reading, specifically an essay or a research paper, I guess you call it, called Unconventional Research in the USSR and Russia by Serge Kernbach. I just extracted the whole part of the document because I want to read this, because it has some very interesting, it's only a small nugget, but it's got some interesting historical connections in it. So, quote, many sources indicate that the post-war Soviet works began with a study of Germany's Ahnenerbe archives removed from the Castle Altan. We cannot say whether this is true or not. On the one hand, these sources claim the documents have not been worked out in the 60s, only later in the 80s and 90s. In publications of that period, we cannot detect any significant breakthrough in the fields of unconventional research. However, on the other hand, it is indicated that German NS specialists were involved in U.S. programs such as MKUltra. In the Soviet Union, the question of continuing unconventional research was raised by the president of the USSR's Academy of Science in 1961, which was resolved positively. It can be assumed that the documents from Ahnenerbe's archive were known to Soviet top leaders, and to some extent they stimulated extensive studies in the 60s and 70s.
Bro.
The research in this period was split into a few areas. First of all, the classic parapsychological experiments with a variety of phenomenon exhibited by psychics were continued. Second, the program on the influence of electromagnetic radiation on biological objects received essential attention. This is the largest program, with many sub-branches and funding, which eventually led to the emergence of the psychotronic weapons discussed in the media. Once again, that's from Unconventional Research in the USSR and Russia by Serge Kernbach. This is like a big-time academic paper and review. If I've got the link still, I'll include it in the sources, but that was one of my more main sources. So, Soviet Psychotronics is basically the Western label for a wide set variety of Soviet-era lines of research and popular or technical discourse about the brain/mind influences, telepathy, biofields, and alleged non-local interactions. Research that ranged from legitimate physiological or psychological experiments to fringe torsion field theories and commercial pseudoscience after the USSR's collapse. Once again, this stuff filtered out into who knows what arenas of daily life once, the private sector got their hands on it. During the Cold War, the Soviet military/intelligence community monitored and, at times, funded or evaluated such work because of the strategic prospect, however speculative it may have been, that mind influence or non-conventional energy phenomena could have military applications. Much of Western concern is documented in declassified CIA/DIA reports, which I will include in the notes, the show notes. You can read the documents yourself. And in published proceedings of international psychotronic conferences, like the one mentioned earlier in Prague, 1973. Major verified actors include experimental parapsychologists such as the aforementioned Leonid Vasilyev, his early telepathy work, and V.P. Kaznachayev, the guy who studied cell-to-cell, non-biochemical, or non-chemical, we'll say, non-chemical communication experiments, and documented reportage of Soviet/Czechoslovakian psychotronic conferences that drew military and intelligence attention. So, probably one of the biggest documents, CIA declassified documents, is the Soviet or Russian/Czechoslovakian psychotronics paper. And I think that's like 70 pages. But a lot of it boils down to what are called psychotronic generators, which are, I'm going to say, from what I understand of the paper, and keeping in mind I'm not the most scientifically inclined guy in the world, but from what I understand, these psychotronic generators are basically they're kind of like magic 8 balls.
You got a question? You ask the 8 ball.
Except that the source, what's inside, what makes them tick, is secret. So it's sort of like a weird, it's like a magic wand. It's a MacGuffin almost. It's weird. I don't know, but that seems to be, as far as Czechoslovakia making their leap forward in the field of psychotronics. That was their prime contribution, and it's very strange. I don't know. It's I think a lot of it. It's like,
bro.
It's like an item for weaponized chaos magic. It all has to do with belief or playing off your enemy's belief, etc. Once again, psychological warfare. Anywho, so in the Soviet sense, psychotronics is an umbrella term used in Eastern Europe for experiments and theories about mind-matter interactions. Once again, biofields, information energy, etc. Can data be stored in biological energies exerted just by the body regularly every day? Now, keeping in mind, I briefly mentioned this last episode, but one of the papers that Alexander Barchenko wrote before he was executed by the state, and it's so sad too, he wrote all these letters. He was like, I can still be useful. I'm a smart man. I know things. Please, don't kill me here in the gulag. But one of his final papers, which is part of, most of which have been, or are still classified to this day. So there's something in there that somebody doesn't want a lot of people to see. But one of the ones that are mentioned, or he mentions in his final letters, is that he discovered some form of energy that is emitted every time a cell replicates. So, you know, our body, full of cells, constantly replicating. So we're always putting out at least some sort of sub-level, like base level energy, you know, according to this finding, this theory of his, and that it's always happening. Like, we've always got this base level of energy being emitted from the body, and like, what, you know, what are the applications of this energy? What is it? What does it do? How can it be manipulated, etc.? So most of what I'm going to cover, besides what we've already talked about, is tangential, or, well, more of the people involved as well. Some of the names involved. If you want to like further research into this stuff, the CIA documents that I'll include are a good start. A lot of this is obviously not in English, so it's hard. There's going to be translation errors on my part, probably, at least a few. Well, that's Google's fault. But anyway, what we can find that is of substance, basically, is, from what I understand, there's not, I don't know, it's everything that has been filtered into use through media, basically. That's the best way that I could say for the weaponization and actual effective use of quote-unquote psychotronics and all the psychotronic research done. That's where it's going to be potentially scary. As I mentioned earlier, there's a phrase that I saw that kept popping up, psychocorrection, which if you know about, as I mentioned several times last episode as well, punitive psychology, the weaponization of psychology by the state, and you know, indoctrination. Psychocorrection is right up there next to indoctrination. It's all about right thinking, you know. This is the right way to think, etc. So there was a guy I mentioned earlier named VP Kaznechayev. Kaznechayev led experiments, notably from the 60s to the 80s, claiming non-chemical cell-to-cell communication, where inducer, quote-unquote, cultures, exposed to damaging treatments allegedly caused a correlative effect in nearby, quote-unquote, detector cultures without chemical transfer. These experiments and later Russian follow-ups are discussed in the biomedical literature and reviews of unconventional research. The idea influenced later claims about biological information transfer via ultra-weak photon emissions and was taken seriously enough to be discussed in international forums. Now, essentially, breaking this down into regular everyday speak for guys and gals like myself, they would, and this is what I was alluding to with the bunnies earlier too. Oh God, this is the part I hate. Stuff with dogs too, but the bunnies got it the worst. Like, essentially, and this is allegedly, I don't know, this is also, there's no confirmation, but I really hope this didn't happen. But basically, they would use various, I'm gonna frame it in the frame of bacterial cultures, because I don't want to get into the bunny stuff, but basically, they did the same thing with bunnies that I'm about to mention with bacterial cultures. They would take a portion of the bacterial culture and subject it to various, for lack of a better word, torture, and see if the prime bacteriological culture, the sample, was affected by the torture affected on the piece that was taken from it. So basically, to put it in the bunny terminology, it's like, can the mother bunny deduce that something bad is happening to its youth, its offspring, someone from its, you know, its hutchmate, whatever. So yeah, apparently, allegedly, a lot. I mean, I don't put it past on the bacteriological culture samples. I'm sure a lot of that happened. I would like to think that the rest is like either American propaganda or like just dark, twisted, conspiratorial framing. But yeah, and there's all kinds of, basically it gets into the realm of the men who stare at goats. Like, there was, Nina Kulagina specifically, she had, you know, quote-unquote psychokinetic abilities, and they were wondering if she could make a frog's heart stop just by staring at it. And allegedly, she did this more than once. But once again, this could be propaganda. We don't know. There's no verified... there's no verification onto whether or not this is true. Soviet and Eastern Bloc psychotronics research was presented in dedicated conferences. Once again, Prague, 1973, first international conference on psychotronic research. The proceedings are recorded, and in regional popular scientific journals, the proceedings documented the existence of an international psychotronics network that included the Soviet and Czechoslovakian participants. There's military and intelligence interest, verified documentation, declassified Western intelligence reporting from the CIA/DIA, reports from the 1970s to the 1990s. They repeatedly assessed Soviet and Czechoslovakian research in parapsychology or psychotronics. Some CIA memoranda warned that the USSR studied psychotronics and psychical phenomena, and that these efforts might be exploited or exaggerated as disinformation. It's a key part to keep in mind. The CIA reading room contains multiple declassified documents summarizing Soviet/Czechoslovakian parapsychological research and conference reports. These documents are a primary basis for Western awareness and concern. So, specific themes in the intelligence records include A. Experiments in telepathy and distant influencing, Vasiliev and his successors. B. Claimed non-contact biological influence, that's Kaznechayev and his posse. And C. Interest in psychotronic generators, quote-unquote, the potential for mind-influenced devices. Many intelligence documents emphasize uncertainty and warn against accepting claims at face value. Some later CIA assessments call psychotronic weaponization a hoax or exaggerated, intended to milk funding. It's a big part of this. Looking at you, United States. Still nothing that the USSR did pursue unconventional biology, psychology, research, etc. Once again, millions upon billions of rubles invested by the state into this. That we do know. We can verify that much for certain. So, no matter how much research was done, we know that millions and billions was fed into it. Some of the more notable experiments and publications, there's Vasiliev's telepathy experiments from the 1920s to the 1950s. He died in the 60s, yeah, okay. Vasiliev's published experiments on quote-unquote mental suggestion and distant influence are documented in his books and later English translations. Critics highlighted limited controls for the experiments. Supporters saw suggestive, positive results. So, tit for tit. The experiments are historically important as early Soviet psychological approaches to psi research. The source on that is Vasiliev's publications, and there's summaries in New Scientist and the Psi Encyclopedia, which is also very helpful in looking at a lot of these claims. Psi Encyclopedia, check it out. Kaznechaev's non-chemical communication experiments from the 70s to 80s. Papers and reviews describe experiments where, once again, inducer cell cultures were damaged by UV radiation, etc. And detector cultures in separate containers showed correlative effects. Authors argued for some kind of informational transfer, photonic or otherwise, and modern reviews of quote-unquote non-chemical cell-to-cell communication reference these Soviet-era experiments with varying degrees of skeptical analysis. See review in Non-Chemical and Non-Contact Cell-to-Cell Communication. Proceedings from the first conference on psychotronic research in Prague, 1973, and later meetings record presentations by Eastern Bloc researchers and include reports on purportedly reproducible generator effects. These proceedings are cited in Western intelligence assessments. The U.S. developed remote viewing, obviously, and related programs, Stargate, Grill Flame, Gondola Wish, etc., in part because of perceived Soviet activity. Declassified U.S. documents show policymakers that were worried about a potential mind war gap, the psychic gap, if you will. Western programs and analyses are well documented in DIA/CIA declassified material and scholarship on Stargate. At the same time, some Western analysts later concluded that Soviet psychotronic weapons claims were greatly exaggerated, and I'll agree with that, at least in a governmental battlefield applications aspect, most definitely. With changing priorities and funding in the late Soviet era and after 1991, many institutional programs wound down or migrated into commercial ventures and fringe research, alternative medicine, torsion field devices, etc. Also, the Kozyrev mirrors, or Kozyrev, I forget the exact name, but the crazy time-space mirrors. Some ideas from Kaznechaev and others persisted in Russian fringe literature and entrepreneurial devices claiming quote-unquote biofield effects. Scholarly overviews of unconventional research in Russia trace this arc and caution about methodological problems. So the structure and rigidity and methodologies of the experimenters and the experiments is highly called into question on very much of this stuff. Methodological cautions. Many original Soviet experiments lack full, modern standard experimental controls. Replication is spotty at best. Scholarly critiques and some Western intelligence memos emphasize poor controls, possible fraud, or hype. Don't believe the hype. Treat extraordinary claims skeptically and follow the primary documents. Western concerns sometimes amplified the apparent scale/strategic intent of Soviet work. CIA documents both warn of possible Soviet breakthroughs and later hedge, calling some claims hoaxes meant to obtain funding. I'm sure that column A, column B, column C, and probably all the way to column Z, if it comes down to it. Classified intelligence as evidence of interest and concern is not proof of operational capability. So that's kind of something I've been saying through this whole thing, that what I do see as potentially applicable to like mass application has been filtered in through telecommunications. But yeah, there's primary documents. I'll have those in the links. The Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology, telepathic hypnosis and related, declassified CIA documents, etc. What it records and what it documents are the experiments, the conferences, and intelligence interests. Bits where the claims become speculative or exaggerated. The most reliable takeaways are that A, Soviet researchers did run legitimate physiological and parapsychological experiments, such as Vasiliev and Kaznechaev. B, the USSR and Eastern Bloc researchers participated in international psychotronic conferences. And C, Western intelligence seriously monitored these programs and sometimes over or understated their significance. So, keeping in mind that, once again, millions and billions of rubles were invested into these programs, that was enough to get the West very interested as well. So the efficacy, the applications, the genuine genuine nature of this stuff is up for debate still, but you can see why one fed into the other, despite the findings or the efficacy as far as the quote-unquote psychic Cold War goes. One of the biggest other sources for this was Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, 1970, reissued as Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain in 1971, and later expanded as Psychic Discoveries, The Iron Curtain Lifted in 1997 by Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder. It's one of the most influential Cold War era popular accounts of Soviet parapsychology. It mixes direct reporting, the two authors toured the USSR in the late 60s, with rumor, there's translation of Soviet articles, and a lot of dramatic framing. The book, while useful in this research, you have to keep in mind these two authors, these women were being fed the dog and pony show. They got the tour, basically. So, I don't know, I don't think it was a whole goodwill, like, let's show our American friends all the psychic killing we can do, etc. So, the aforementioned Nina Kulagina, a Soviet psychic, perhaps the most famous case. She was a Leningrad housewife. Go figure. She was filmed apparently moving small objects like matches, salt shakers, shake it like a salt shaker, compass needles with her psychokinetic abilities. Soviet scientists supposedly monitored her heartbeat, brainwaves, and blood chemistry during demonstrations, and her pulse skyrocketed. And she suffered fatigue after, quote-unquote, moving these objects. So whatever it was she was doing, she had some kind of byproduct, some physiological byproduct effect, if you will, that, that whatever she was doing, whether it was really, really hard acting, whatever it was, had a serious physiological effect on her.
Bro.
Nina Kulagina, something was happening. So Soviet parapsychologists, particularly Gennady Sergeyev, publicly presented her as proof of psychokinesis, though skeptics accused her of sleight of hand or the weird biochemical film super ability supposedly she had. Anywho, Ostrander and Schroeder, the writers of Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, described the Soviet claims of dermal vision or skin sight, where blindfolded subjects allegedly read text or distinguished colors with their fingertips or cheeks. Some demonstrations involved children running obstacle courses while blindfolded, guided only by skin vision. Oh my, I would love to be a fly on the wall to watch that. This became tied to research into bioenergetic fields, with speculation that humans might sense electromagnetic emanations from the surfaces of certain objects, papers, etc. Kirlian photography. They encountered Simeon and Valentina Kirlian, who had developed high-voltage photographic techniques capturing glowing auras, quote-unquote, around living and non-living objects. Leaves photographed this way seem to retain an aura even after being cut, which was interpreted as evidence of a life force. Phantom limb syndrome, if you will. The Kirlians themselves were practical experimenters, but the effect later fed into both fringe and New Age claims of aura photography. There were reports of Soviet, quote-unquote, bioenergetics healers who allegedly used hands-on or intent to heal illnesses. Ostrander and Schroeder interviewed practitioners who insisted this wasn't mysticism, but a form of, quote-unquote, energy transfer measurable with scientific instruments. Some healers were studied in clinics, with doctors noting changes in patient condition and even shifts in EEG or ECG tracings when connected to certain diagnostic machinery. These tests were highlighted by Vasiliev of Leningrad, who claimed to have induced sleep or awakening in hypnotized subjects from miles away. This is one of the bigger, stranger findings. I mean, this is documented apparently, at least by Ostrander and Schroeder, claim that they noticed or seen demonstrations of this several times where sleep could be induced in a subject from far away. So not quite remote viewing, but they could at least like shut off the consciousness of someone, which in itself is fairly frightening, if in fact true. The Leningrad/Sevastopol experiments supposedly tested whether telepathic influence could be transmitted over hundreds of miles, with some success reported. There were ESP tests with animals. These are the okay ones, I guess. Soviet labs ran telepathy tests with dogs. Actually, all the way back to Bekhterev and the beginning of the Brain Institute, psychic communication between humans and dogs was a big part of like their opening salvo into all this stuff. There was allegedly some dog trainer that they got in who was very famous. He was basically the Caesar Milan of his time, and they were hooking him and dogs up to various diagnostic medical machinery to see how he could just mentally program these dogs to do things. But looking back on that particular field of experimentation and what we know now, there could be all kinds of nonverbal cues. I don't know, a shift in butt smell. Anything's possible as to how communication could have taken place between a person and their pets in this particular aspect of the research. Other reports included animals reacting to their owners' emotions or commands at a distance. I really hope the whole rabbit and other stuff in that I hope that's not true. I hope that didn't happen. The Soviets, despite their many failings, they strike me as people who are they love their animals. Maybe more so than America. I don't know. But then there's also Space Dog.
Laika.
What's her name?
Laika. It's
Kalinka?
Laika.
I forget. Anywho, Space Dogs. There's accounts of controlled tests where subjects correctly described hidden pictures, shapes, or events while in altered states of consciousness, such as sleep, hypnosis, or trance. Soviet parapsychologists often frame this as quote-unquote biological radio communication, not occultism. So once again, you have the Marxist materialist interpretation of such phenomenon. While less detailed in the 1970s version of Ostrander and Schroeder's book, they picked up Soviet hints of using bioenergetics for defense purposes. They reported rumors of quote-unquote psychotronic generators that could affect human emotions, behavior, or health. This strand would later explode in the West into stories of mind control.
Man, I got mind control.
Mind control and energy weapons. All of these come from Ostrander and Schroeder's reporting, which combined interviews with Soviet researchers, often through translators. So once again, you've got another, besides the Dog and Pony show, you've also got another layer there for miscommunication or disinformation, and summaries of Soviet scientific papers. However, later historians, such as Znamensky, the man who wrote Red Shambhala, read that book. It's awesome. Rosenthal, Menzel, and Brian Josephson, etc., various writers, comment on parapsychology. They have emphasized that much of this material blurred the lines between serious Soviet fringe science, stage demonstrations for Western visitors, and the author's own sensationalized framing. So, other Soviet-era weirdness, not in the book, but within this same the same time frame as well. There's alleged telepathic submarine experiments, alleged Soviet Navy experiments to test telepathic communication between submarines under Arctic ice in the mid-1960s. This was reported in Western Intelligence Digest, CIA FOIA docs, such as Parapsychology in the USSR, 1977, etc. There's the Wolf Messing story. Wolf Messing was a Jewish psychic / mentalist said to have impressed Stalin by predicting World War II outcomes and mentally compelling people, quote unquote. Mentally compelling, whatever that means. Messing's autobiography, published in the 1960s in the USSR, and Soviet propaganda pieces make mention of this. Western skeptics note he was a stage illusionist using material repurposed as state myth. Then you've got biofield generators, quote unquote. In the 1970s, Czech and Soviet engineers claimed to build machines amplifying human psychic energy. Czech psychotronics literature summarized in Sheila Ostrander's and Schroeder's 1997 update to the book Psy. Of all the strange things reported in Ostrander and Schroeder's psychic discoveries and the wider Soviet parapsychology scene, which claims actually had enough verification, replication, documentation, or declassified Western intelligence interest to be considered at least startling but real, quote unquote, rather than purely rumor. So the skin vision, once again, a woman previously mentioned, Rose Kuleshova's fingertips, where color reading and text reading was actually tested under controlled conditions at Moscow's Institute for Problems of the Brain, ran by a man named Kogan in the 1960s. Western visitors, including Ostrander and Schroeder, and later British parapsychologists, saw her perform this. She really did perform above chance, like she had an intriguing percentage, we'll say. I think if I remember correctly, for the remote viewing programs in America, you had to have a 65 or higher percentage of accuracy. So I don't know what the Soviets were going by, but I'm sure it was something similar. But when stricter blindfolding and shielding were used, the effect dropped sharply on Miss Kuleshova's skin vision. In other words, the phenomena existed as a behavioral curiosity, but not as a robust new sense. She wasn't Daredevil in it, basically. It's one of the few Soviet psi claims documented in mainstream Soviet science journals, however, such as Soviet Physics, Uspekhi, 1965. There was telepathic hypnosis / mental suggestion at a distance. Dr. Leonid Vasiliev did decades of published work, such as the book Experiments in Mental Suggestion, 1962, where hypnotists attempted to induce states or suggestions in distant subjects. The Soviets led Western parapsychologists he let them see his lab, basically. The effects were inconsistent and small, but the research existed and was methodologically recorded. CIA / Department of Defense summaries in the 1970s cite Vasiliev as the leading Soviet telepathy researcher. It's a large state-funded telepathy program, not just anecdotes. So even skeptics note the scale and the Navy's interest. There's also the coronal discharge imaging, aka Kirlian photography, the phantom leaf effect, where, once again, a missing leaf segment still showing in the coronal image was reproducible under certain conditions because moisture residue on the plate retained the outline. That's the quote-unquote official debunking of that, so it goes, I guess. The glow is real. It's real physics, not psychic energy, but the Soviet discovery of high-voltage coronal photography was genuinely novel and is still used in materials science and botany today. One of the books that came up tangentially in this research was The Secret Life of Plants, because there's actually quite a good deal of research into plant consciousness. Who knew? I mean, we all kind of, it's one of those things that you hear about, but you don't really think about all the time. But I mean, plants do respond to music, attention, etc. So kiss your plants, hug your plants. Plant man knows where the plants will grow. There's this certified, this is obvious, CIA, DoD documentation of the Soviet interest into this. FOIA releases such as the Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology research circa 1977, should be in the show notes, confirmed that the USSR was running serious programs on telepathy, biolocation, psychokinesis, and quote-unquote biological emission detection well into the 1970s. Did you just take a dump? Okay, because I had to sense something, there's some kind of a mission happening. U.S. analysts concluded no conclusive evidence of actual psi effects, but acknowledged the program's existence and sophistication. The Soviets were devoting real institutional resources to subjects the West largely left to private parapsychologists. And it should be noted that also in the Soviet Union, there were a small handful of private individuals or institutions also doing parapsychology research, but it's spotty at best because the large majority of all this stuff was under, state funding and state investigation. So anything outside of that probably didn't last very long or was very, 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 very secretive and kept to the people's selves, whoever was doing it. You've also got Ivan Pavlov, mentioned before, the guy who made dog slobber. His successors did experiments with dogs responding to their owner's return, even at unusual distances. Results looked like telepathy, but could be explained by routine conditioning, cues, and timing. Now, despite the fact that this is not telepathic in nature, still, the behavioral and psychological ramifications of these studies cannot be understated. In fact, it's almost a bit scarier if you take it into certain possible directions. It's not paranormal. The research happened and was published in Soviet behavioral science journals. Nina Kulagina, she was filmed under lab conditions, moving small objects such as compass needles, egg yolks, etc. Western physicists like Edward Naumov witnessed this phenomena. No fraud was caught on camera, but no airtight controls on these experiments either. So the CIA classifies it as quote-unquote unverified. She remains one of the best documented PK claimants with actual Soviet lab footage, which you can find on the internets. The startling but verifiable parts are not so much the phenomena themselves, but the scale and formality of Soviet state research on telepathy, dermo-optical perception, aka skin vision, and psychokinesis, or PK. The fact that Western intelligence agencies took it seriously enough to monitor, translate, and model potential quote-unquote psychotronic weaponry. Some phenomena, such as skin vision and Kirlian imaging, were genuine curiosities, or real technologies that got draped in mystical rhetoric and lore. Everything else, such as long-distance astral projection, psychic weapons, quote-unquote, phantom limbs of leaves as proof of an aura, etc., was either misinterpreted science, uncontrolled experiments, or deliberate hype. Now, here, what follows is a breakdown of what is verifiably documented, but what's more speculative / rumor, and what the sources say, especially around torsion fields, psychotronic weapons, and Kozarev mirrors. I didn't find any solid proof of any psychotronic weapon being built and deployed, but there are rabbit holes and hearsay, some of which are tied to intelligence / confession / journalism sources. Everything with a source is noted, so you can see what's real, what's thin, what's aspirational myth building, Monday morning quarterbacking, so to speak, on behalf of the government. CIA document, quote, psychotronic weapons dupes KGB and Soviet military, 1993. In this declassified CIA FOIA document, there is an interview with Yevgeny Alexandrov of the Vavilona Optical Institute.
Bro.
Alexandrov claimed the experiments were conducted, or that the experiments conducted in the former Soviet Union on mind-altering weapons happened, but he said that much of the research was a hoax or exaggerated to get funding. Psychological warfare, psyops. The document mentions 500 million rubles spent since the 1970s on, and this is 1993, 500 million rubles spent since the 1970s into 1993 on research aiming to produce weapons that could modify a soldier's behavior, such as loss of will, induced fatigue, hallucinations, via quote-unquote transmissions. However, Alexandrov states it did not have quote-unquote real content, meaning no known weapon was actually built or deployed with proven effect. I will say, however, that in the research, everything I looked at, there are several mentions of certain instances in which people have allegedly been knocked unconscious from afar, like made to go to sleep. Now, I don't know if this is like, oh, I'm tired, I better lay down, or just like drop to the floor, pass out. There's not a lot of finer points being detailed on that, so who knows. CIA / declassified Soviet intelligence acknowledgement of bioplasms, psychotronic energy research. The CIA document, Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology research, mentions bioplasmic or psychotronic energy and devices or generators in Czechoslovakia whose design is shape dependent, etc. Whether or not they function as weapons is not confirmed. This is what I mentioned earlier about the magic 8 balls and the sort of weaponization of, or attempted weaponization of, chaos magic properties, methodologies, etc. Articles in Komsomolskaya Pravda and other papers in 1991 report that there were quote-unquote psychotronic generators allegedly launched in Kiev, claiming that it could affect human organisms, particularly impacting the cerebral cortex, but those are journalistic claims, not trials or lab evidence. Psychotronic weapons actually produced and deployed, no credible, verifiable case confirmed in declassified archives that a fully functioning weapon with confirmed effects was built, tested, or used. All credible sources I found either hedge on, like, saying research was done, funds were spent, or outright say the claims were unsubstantiated or hoaxes, like as Alexandrov from his interview mentioned earlier. Torsion fields, once again, no idea. If anyone knows, please explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. But torsion fields, Kozarev mirrors, shape generators, these are widely discussed in fringe and esoteric sources, and there are experiments claimed, but almost all of them lack reproducible scientific publication in mainstream peer-reviewed journals. Some are reported in Russian alternative science or popular science / eclectic publications. For example, Kozarev mirrors are attributed to Nikolai Kozarev and later folk / alternative researchers like Trofimov and Kaznichev. Their claim to create altered states, visionary experiences, time distortion, etc. I found no rigorous peer-reviewed source or sources confirming these effects in a reliable scientific journal. Many of the descriptions come from UFO or paranormal websites or esoteric fringe science blogs, etc. Quantum Pranks, Rex Research. If you don't know Rex Research, check it out. My God, it's like golden era, like late 80s, early 90s, pseudoscience, conspiratorial. It's just great. It's great. And weird history facts, etc. The Center for Non-Traditional Technologies, or C&T, is mentioned in some journalistic sources, Molodaya Gvardia, or PERM,
Bro,
as having researched, quote-unquote, remote medical and biological influences, torsionic radiation, etc. But again, these seem to be claims made in press, not fully documented lab results. You can check mindjustice.org or Quantum Pranks, Rex Research, etc. Some of the stuff involved in the show notes that's like not declassified CIA documents, but like websites on fringe science, etc. Man, just a time suck. Oh my God, it's just so much fascinating shit you could spend hours looking at. Anyways, the name Kozyrev, yeah, it's referring to Nikolai Alexandrovich Kozyrev, a Soviet astrophysicist. So Kozyrev mirrors been dealt a lot of mythologizing, basically, and this is largely post-Soviet era that this stuff came out. Once again, Y-Files did an excellent video on them. I would suggest checking that out. These are sort of like mirrored, totally tubular apparati that are part of fringe psychotronics lore. The lore says they were built from polished metal, maybe hollow tubes or spiral mirrors, which a spiral mirror, right off the bat, sounds fucking awesome. They're meant to concentrate or reflect some kind of quote-unquote time flow or torsion field energy. Trofimov and Kazanachev are often cited in relation, but again, no reliable scientific or military archive confirms that Kozyrev mirrors were used as weapons or that they produced measurable, repeatable psychic effect of any kind. They remain in a borderline area, the twilight zone of the outer limits, as far as experimental ideas, speculation, and folklore. I will say, however, that the fringe sort of supernatural / science overlap and the use of mirrors as technology does have a rich history. There's something called a psychomantium, which right off the bat, fucking awesome name, be a cool band name, but it's basically a room of mirrors. It's like a small chamber that you go into, and all the walls are mirrors. And these were used in early spiritualists / seance type shit. Like you just go in this room and everything is reflected off everything. So you're in the, if you've held a mirror to a mirror before, then you know what I'm talking about. But you're in a room of that basically. Now I don't know if they have ever done this, but I would love to take that idea and cross it with the sort of the auditory dampening effects, those rooms where there's like no sound, basically, like all you can hear is the sounds inside your body, your own heartbeat, your brain screaming into the abyss. I would love to cross those two and see what you get, what the effects are, because that is a whole other kind of just strange, weird deprivation tank or whatever. Deprivation tanks, is that right? Yeah, the stuff that Dr. Lilly was shooting himself full of fucking ketamine and getting into. So the Soviet KGB / military money investigating mind influence and psychotronics and energy-based research. Some of this might have been preparation or early stage experiments as far as what specifically Ostrander and Schroeder in their book were privy to be shown. It's verified by various CIA documents and interviews with people like Alexandrov. However, there is no convincing declassified documentation that a quote-unquote psychotronic weapon with reliably demonstrated effects was ever built, fielded, or used. Many claims were later admitted or claimed by insiders to be exaggeration or straight-up fraud. Alexandrov says so.
Bro.
Torsion field theories and mirrored chambers, like Kozyrev mirrors, exist in partial documentation and esoteric literature, but with very weak empirical backing. They are interesting, for folklore or fringe studies or as cultural artifacts, but not heavy on the solid science. Now, once again, looking at, not too recent news, we have claims of Havana syndrome. Dr. Michael Persinger, a neurologist, created the quote-unquote Corin helmet, nicknamed the God helmet, in the 1980s and 90s. It's a Canadian project using weak pattern magnetic fields across the temporal lobe to induce mystical experiences. Now, the temporal lobe, for those who don't know, if you suffer from, say, temporal lobe epilepsy, all throughout history and culture and folklore, people who have been afflicted with temporal lobe epilepsy way back in the day were seen as, shamans, mystics, etc. They were touched by the gods, what have you. I believe one of the Caesars, I forget which one, maybe Orange Julius himself, was afflicted by this. There's something in the temporal lobe, and I'm going to suggest just by the name alone, temporal has to do with and once again, I don't know shit about science, especially not brain function. I'm trying to learn more, but, one day at a time. Temporal lobe, it has to do with our perceptions of time, etc. So I've heard or read reports of temporal lobe seizures as people having what accounts or is similar to deja vu or things like this, like certain unexplainable feelings of the mind and presence and things that have been experienced or will be experienced, etc. So although I'm just taking random pieces of history that we know and kind of putting them into the frame as disconnected jigsaw pieces, but holding up all this stuff together, it's very strange. And then, neuroenergetics, neurotheology is a field of study that came out of looking into Dr. Persinger's God helmet. There's likely some part of the brain that, when it's stimulated with these God helmet, experiments, there's a presence in the room, a felt presence. People have actually claimed to have seen entities in the room, but always kind of out of view, like to their peripheral, etc. A lot of it sounds like meth shadow people in the same vein or whatever. Hauntings, etc. And infrasound. Infrasound blasted at the brain makes people feel like there's a presence. There's something else there. It makes them feel feelings of dread, existential dread. So I don't know. The whole sonic aspect of this is very interesting to me. There's various urban legends, if you will, of something that the Nazis invented called a ferroliminal lycanthropizer. There's some noise machine that played. Everyone knows the brown noise and what that does. And then there's white noise, which calms you down. In essence, whatever noise came out of this quote-unquote ferroliminal lycanthropizer, I guess I've dubbed it the red noise. That's what I would call it, because it's supposed to just turn you into a fucking werewolf, hence lycanthropizer, but it's supposed to induce just animalistic fury, rage, violence, etc. So, as well as a weird sexual component to it, according to some of the urban legends. So, it's just something that, once again, lycanthropizer turns you into a fucking animal. So, who knows? Electrosleep and transcranial electrotherapy. Soviet clinicians have used electrosleep devices extensively from the 1950s onward. A lot of the stuff that they found in these experiments and research has been more or less enfolded into psychiatric medicine, as far as what can be done with machinery and diagnostic tools, etc. These sort of morphed into over time. The electrosleep and transcranial electrotherapy, these are mild pulsed electrical currents via electrodes over the temples or eyelids to induce relaxation and sleep. Relaxing. This is a mainstream medical practice in the USSR, not fringe. The devices are still sold on the open market as quote-unquote transcranial electrostimulation. I believe we have these in the States too. TES does not cause mystical visions like the God helmet, but it can change mood, anxiety, and pain perception. Pain perception was another big part of what kind of came out of this research as well. Biofield and torsion claims in fringe circles. You'll find stories about torsion field generators producing quote-unquote altered states of consciousness or quote-unquote telepathic enhancement. But this is more like the tales of the Kozyrev mirrors than an actual helmet experiment or whatever. There's no reproducible scientific publications that confirm such effects. I don't know. I would think that the Soviets would love to get their hands on something like a God helmet. Not for the not for the reasons you might think, but I don't know. I could see it. See some very strange alternate history branching out of that. So, but yeah, bottom line, the USSR did a lot with electrical and magnetic stimulation of the brain, but almost entirely for sedation and pain control, or supposed psychocorrection. Quote-unquote psychocorrection, not for inducing mystical visions. So the God helmet idea, as such, seems to have been a Western / Dr. Michael Persinger himself, his development, though it overlaps conceptually with Soviet electrosleep helmets and later psychocorrection interfaces. Now, this term psychocorrection sounds kind of scary, right? Psychocorrection is a late Soviet, early post-Soviet term for a family of methods aimed at directly altering or influencing a subject's mental states using non-invasive techniques, largely non-surgical. The surgical shit, I think America probably had their hands more up in human brains than the Soviets did, but the jury's out on that one. Most notably, subliminal auditory and visual inputs, sometimes coupled with electromagnetic or acoustic stimulation, sound waves, etc. It shows up in both official and gray literature sources, but, there's, for anyone who's looked into the classifications of propaganda, black, white, gray. Gray is, it has some useful information in it, but it also has an equal amount of bullshit laced into it. But gray literature sources from the 1970s to the 1990s, usually tied to research at the Kirov Military Medical Academy and Institute of Experimental Medicine in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, as well as collaborations with defense industry labs. Psychocorrection was defined as per Russian sources, the programmed verbal influence on a person's subconscious through subliminal, low-intensity messages embedded in sound or visual streams. In practice, this often meant inaudible verbal cues or commands layered under music, white noise, or TV/radio programming. Variants included auditory subliminals, such as whispered commands below consciousness threshold. Visual subliminals, such as images flashed too quickly for conscious perception, i.e., Disney's animation programming a generation of sex bots in monarch literature, etc. Biofeedback-linked corrections, where EEG patterns were trained towards desired norms, quote-unquote desired norms, whatever those may be. Some papers mention weak electromagnetic fields or ultrasound as adjuncts. 1980s, the term psychocorexia. Psychocorexia appears in Soviet psychiatric / neurophysiology journals. Techniques were pitched as therapeutic, largely, to treat alcoholism, anxiety, criminal behavior, or to even re-educate, quote-unquote, dissidents. Post-Soviet collapse, psychocorrection devices and techniques began circulating in the commercial sphere. The Russian army reportedly tested subliminal audio and visual material for troop morale conditioning. 1993, controversial U.S. Defense Department translation of a Russian paper described, quote, acoustic subliminal messages, unquote, for behavior modification. It's one of the reasons why psychocorrection entered Western sci-tech lore and terminology. How widespread was it? Well, the therapeutic use is widespread, quote-unquote therapeutic use. Clinics in late Soviet / early Russian Federation period did use subliminal tapes and quote-unquote psychocorrective audiovisual programming for people to quit smoking, alcoholism, etc., and these were advertised as such in the press. There's no proof of mass deployment, at least by the military or government. We have the obvious examples of Havana syndrome, although who's doing it and why? I mean, it's largely occurring in diplomatic settings, embassies, etc. So obviously there's a political component behind whoever's doing it, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it's a rogue state bad actor, or whatever you want to call it. Some pilot tests in the 80s and 90s with soldiers were used for gauging stress resistance or quote-unquote ideological reinforcement. The most famous case, the most famous Western claim, came from a 1993 paper by the aforementioned Dr. Igor Smirnov, the Institute of Psychocorrection in Moscow. So there's a whole goddamn institute, at least there was, probably maybe still is, I don't know, who said subliminal psychocorrective methods could be used to insert commands directly into the subconscious. Now, allegedly, this was done at a scale where we're talking dozens to hundreds of test subjects in labs, not millions. Nothing like the science fictional picture of whole populations being quote-unquote subliminally programmed by Soviet television. Francis E. Deck, I believe was his name, the guy who ranted and raved psychotically about Soviet Frankenstein mind gangsters, etc. Not quite that scale, but he wasn't wrong either. Quick programming note, I will include in the show notes a documentary on Francis E. Deck. He's a fucking weirdo. I have there's a lost episode of this show that covered him, but it has been lost to time, unfortunately. Or probably fortunately, actually. Back to the show. Psychocorrection is real in the sense that Soviet and Russian labs and clinicians research subliminal influence on behavior. The military was interested in and did small-scale trials, but it was not widespread. There's no evidence that exists, no evidence that exists that the USSR rolled it out nationally, nor that it achieved the level of control described in sensational Western press. It's been seen as a fusion of clinical subliminal therapy meets Cold War military imagination, with its reputation inflated in the 1990s when Russian scientists pitched it to Western security circles. So looking around, here's what you could find. This is where we get into... So I mentioned the psychocorrection because from everything I've seen and read into on this, that seems to be the useful applications of much of what was found during all of this. As far as, once again, consider the source, how much is going to be declassified, etc., and what side we're getting most of this information from. Now, as far as people who claim to be victims, this is where you get into the really just horrific shit, because this is kind of what interests me the most about all this stuff, because it's either that there are people with access to technology that can fuck people up really bad, or alternatively, and I mean there's many alternatives to this, but this is the one that interests me. Alternatively, there is a specific disease or culture-bound syndrome of people who believe and act as if this is the case, that they are persecuted by secret machinery, secret technologies that have actual physiological effects. Like these, it's not just a delusion necessarily. There are actual physical effects taking place. Like, well, goddamn, we'll get into it. So, one of the sources I looked into, and I will try to include this in show notes as well, is a document with a fucking badass name, but it's harrowing stuff. It's called Psychotronic Golgotha, written by N.I. Anisimov, as with contributions of others, I believe. This victim describes long-term covert suffering, voices or images inserted into the mind, dreams disrupted, that's fucking weird, assaults on organs such as the heart, brain vessels, etc., severe neurological symptoms, hallucinations, the inability to get medical help, sensors, filters, devices in living spaces to block psychotronic attacks. Anisimov claims there are over 1 million victims in the former USSR who believe themselves to be subjects of psychotronic terror, harassment, victimization, etc. He even says that his grandchild was born with slight mutations due to some of the stuff that he's been subjected to, is passed on to his child, and now his grandchild, which is yikes. So the psychological portrait is intense. There's a loss of agency, medical professionals declaring victims as mentally ill, quote unquote, forced psychiatry. See, stuff like this too during the era of punitive psychiatry is extra terrifying. I don't know, it's just it's like being lost in the system, but it's the medical system and just various asylums and mental health facilities, quote unquote. Forced psychiatry, years of suffering, isolation, the ideas of quote unquote donors or quote unquote experimentees being selected for psychological or intellectual profile adds a sinister depth. Like, how do they determine who they want to use? What are the, like if you sent your dinner back at a restaurant one day and they made note of it and someone caught it. I don't know. I could just picture it's like Curb Your Enthusiasm turning into a horror movie all of a sudden. It's almost entirely based on testimonial / victim advocate reporting, translations, activist literature, etc. There's no independent trial or scientific study publicly confirming the more extreme allegations. Many claims are similar to those found in political conspiracy networks. There's another victim, Andrei Slapucha, also affiliated with the Moscow Zombie Group, psychotronic victim activist, in a documentary called ZDF, or Zombies, I believe, came out in 1998 via German TV. Slapucha claims to have suffered from sudden vivid neural / brain symptoms, loss of bodily control, except one limb, Jesus, quote unquote, very strong sounds in the head, V2K, voice to skull, we know that shit's real, visual / auditory hallucinations, sudden destruction of brain vessels that was diagnosed officially as a vascular problem, though no visible vessel corresponded, usage of personal protective gear, sensors, shielding. Once again, the true, quote-unquote, true story behind tinfoil hats. It's harrowing shit, man. I couldn't even imagine. Jesus, like, I don't know. It's kind of shitty that we've made just a goofy trope of it, and there's people that actually, I don't know. I've looked into some of this, just what these people are suffering through, and fuck, man, whatever. I mean, I don't know. It just kind of makes light of it, but whatever. We have no... This is how we create the language for things like this, and just you forget the tinfoil hat's just the tip of the pyramid, and all the fucking physiological, psychological, and literary base for it is all the bricks below, and we're always just looking at the tip. We don't think about what it takes to build all the way up to that. The details are visceral. Physical disability, loss of speech, fear of an invisible assault, trying to live a semi-normal life wearing sensors and filters, tinfoil hats. It suggests a belief by victims that these attacks are continuous, invasive, and life-ruining. The documentary provides visual testimony, but medical confirmations are thin. Many diagnoses seem unclear. The possibility of neurological illness, being misdiagnosed, or psychosomatic illness cannot be ruled out, obviously. There's victims described in Mind Justice, the quote-unquote Russian book project. Individuals describe psychotronic attacks via phone, radio interference, voices inserted into their heads, V2K, signals from their neighbor's house, various antennas, anywhere, just seeing an antenna, Jesus, and just, ugh. Strong electromagnetic odors, that's weird, disruptions of sleep, extreme physical discomfort, inability to function socially. Some say they are monitored constantly or forced into isolation or psychiatric labels. This almost seems like, I mean, in the U.S. we have an apparent willingness in a lot of people to self-diagnose and adhere to this self-diagnosis of various disorders, quote unquote. This seems like the opposite of that, like the total opposite. Like, no, there's something going on. Oh, Jesus, I can only imagine. The cumulative suffering includes apartments being sealed off, a constant state of paranoid vigilance, fear of your neighbors, no recourse, being labeled insane when seeking medical or legal help. For many, the suffering is existential and unrelenting. It's mostly anecdotal, supported by victim networks. There are people who will help as much as they can. There are institutions that will help as much as they can. There's no public medical studies confirming the physiological basis in peer review. There's often no verifiable documentation beyond self-reports. So many claims overlap with quote-unquote targeted individual narratives, obviously, common in online communities. There's been an inverse to this targeted individual community that I've seen pop up, that I've seen them refer to themselves as chosen ones. They've been singled out specifically for harassment because they are special in some way, which, yeah, okay, maybe, but I don't know. It seems we just have a very narcissistic, inbuilt, like an inherent narcissism in America, at least, that is just perpetual. And I don't know. It's we're all guilty of it. So, I mean, I'm not talking shit. It's just that it's very, we got to do something. I don't know. I don't know what you can do. Like, I know that I definitely suffer from narcissism at various times, but that's kind of what drove me into Buddhism and various Buddhist beliefs and philosophies, that like we all possess the capability of becoming enlightened, of being better than we are. We can all change for the better. And you have to get outside yourself. Get outside yourself, like be or make connections with the otherness, etc. Like get to know the shadow side of things, etc. Moving on. That's just me editorializing. But Igor Smirnov's reports on experiments/victims. Like Smirnov allegedly developed devices called programmators or psychoacoustic correction devices. Jesus, that sounds terrifying. Capable of delivering imperceptible auditory signals, V2K, voice to skull, influencing moods, inserting verbal images in subconscious minds. Some victims claim these have been used on them involuntarily. There are also claims of collaboration of his institute with military and intelligence institutes seeking mind control technology. Mind control!
Man, I got mind control.
You can read more about that on psychotronictechnology.blogspot.com or mindjustice.org. The technical framing, using devices, labs, clandestine projects, and institutes, gives these stories a sharper edge. And it's not just my neighbor hurting me with invisible waves, but there's a person/institute who built a device to do this. For victims, the powerlessness under this alleged technology is deeply terrifying. Smirnov is a known figure. Some documentary evidence exists, and again, there's no publicly verified peer-reviewed medical study confirming harmful effects in many cases. Much is reported in Psychotronics/mind control advocacy media, or victim advocacy media, etc. Anonymous psychiatric hospitals/prisoners of institutions, medical, military, or otherwise, have psychotronic abuse stories. Some people claim being placed involuntarily in psychiatric facilities after reporting psychotronic attacks. Inside, their complaints are dismissed as delusions. Sometimes they claim sensory or visual hallucinations, interruptions of speech, physical paralysis, being quote-unquote attacked by sounds or electromagnetic fields in those facilities. There's also claims that psychiatric detention is used to silence victims, such as the author of Psychotronic Golgotha, or various people on mindjustice.org. These are particularly harrowing because they combine alleged technology abuse with forced medical confinement, the convergence of legal, medical, and psychic harm. For many victims, being institutionalized is part of the harm. Loss of reputation, autonomy, etc. Again, primarily it's testimonial, little or no published medical/legal documentation. Institutional denials are common. Obviously, they're, why, yes, we are psychotronically harassing you, Ted. Good job. You figured it out. Nothing like that's going to fucking happen. So there are advocacy groups. That's probably the best that these people can do or get hold of. And I don't know. It's unfortunate, but they also probably live in countries with far better health care than the United States. So there's that at least. Jesus Christ. Yeah, enough. I don't want to dig deeper into that because it fucking is super upsetting. But it's a book called, I mentioned earlier, Homo Sovieticus, written by Vladimir Velminsky, or Vladimir Velminsky. Some of the control methods, both scientific or pseudoscientific, cultural, media, and propaganda, that Velminsky outlines in Homo Sovieticus are brainwaves, mind control, and... the full title is Homo Sovieticus, Brainwaves, Mind Control, and Telepathic Destiny. And these are drawn from the published summaries, reviews, and book descriptions. Some are verified experiments, others more speculative or anecdotal, but all are presented by Velminsky as real practices or programs in the Soviet context. There's also note where Velminsky frames things as more metaphorical or aspirational, once again, like post-Soviet myth-making, than being fully operational. There's an instance of mass hypnosis via television broadcast. In 1989, Anatoly Kashpirovsky gave televised, quote-unquote, therapeutic sessions, quote, relax, let your thoughts wander free, etc. Then attempted to calm and influence the public during political upheaval. Essentially a mass hypnosis attempt using mass media to manage public panic and assure ideological conformity during a period of crisis, i.e. the collapse of the Soviet Union. This was summarized in the book description and reviews and quotes, etc. Velminsky treats it as a late Soviet public face of long-standing research. There's a conflation of mental energy with electromagnetic theories, attempts to track or use quote-unquote brainwaves or quote-unquote telepathic energy, etc. Ideological control, linking citizens' mental states to state power, exploring whether thought and emotion can be harnessed or patterned. The book basically encapsulates the entire process of which all the research into this stuff funnels down to. Like all the fucking psychotronic research that the millions and billions of rubles was spent on funnels down into essentially mass media manipulation. He talks about something called the orathron and aura fields, or the electroauragram. Research into aura fields, i.e. Kirlian auras, etc., aura colors, measuring electrical biological signatures around people. Proposals for devices like the electroauragram to record human energy fields, possibly as a way to monitor or assess loyalty to the party or thought patterns, as well as a generalized idea of bioenergetic realism, quote unquote, that blurs metaphysics and physiology. Velminsky refers to articles and journals from Soviet science and youth publications, such as Technology and Youth, that floated these ideas. Like, you could check the Times Higher Education for some more info on that. The use of media, art, architecture, and propaganda as cybernetic feedback systems, i.e. the regime, shaping environments, visual and auditory cues, immersive media to calibrate public thought, those being desires, emotions, ideological conformity, etc., shaping citizen psychology even without overt coercion, aligning desires of individuals with the goals of the state. There's a chapter in Velminsky's book on quote-unquote cybernetic circuits and discussion of televisual patterns and the use of mass media and TV broadcasts as a weapon of the state. Experimental methods on animals. Oh, God, I hate this shit. Velminsky describes a lab where quote-unquote mind control methods were tested on dogs, experiments designed to influence behavior or responses via mental suggestion or environmental/stimulus conditions. to test proof of concept for non-human models, possibly for eventual human application, or to legitimize the research in scientific and defense contexts. The labor thought process calibration attempts to quote-unquote measure or quote-unquote calibrate thought processes of workers, i.e. to optimize productivity, reduce dissent, or monitor mood and attention. Control via optimization of manpower, psychological control in workplaces, making behaviors predictable and manageable. Velminsky mentions this as part of quote-unquote ergonomic operations and quote-unquote material foundation sections of everything that was gleaned from much of this research. Televisual passions, media rituals, use of TV, mass broadcast, and media rituals, i.e. hypnotic or therapeutic programs, such as the televised mass hypnosis mentioned earlier, to emotionally and psychologically engage citizens, mixing entertainment, therapy, and propaganda. Holy shit, that's everything you look at in America today. To blur the line between popular media and state messages, to normalize regime messaging as health or comfort rather than coercion. The late 1989 Kasparovsky broadcasts are the prime example. Velminsky positions them as a culmination of many smaller media experiments. Even architecture as control. Velminsky discusses how architectural forms, urban design, housing layouts, monuments, signs and wonders, etc., shape behavior, social interactions, visibility, and conformity. Spaces are designed to encourage surveillance, to make individuals aware of their exposure. This goes even further if you're looking into things like smart cities, which, goddamn, I don't know. I got a whole other thing on megalopolymancy and the mutation of cities over time I'm working on, so I don't want to get too deep into that right now. But information and youth culture influence, like, this is where most of it starts, obviously. Journals like Technology and Youth science publications, popular youth media are used to seed interest in parapsychology, telepathy, aura, etc., or even retarded dumb shit conspiracy theories. They take off in youth movements, and social media is the fucking viral vector, basically. Velminsky shows how experiments in scientific curiosity were woven with ideological content. Many of these methods are documented in Soviet scientific or pseudoscientific literature and in media. However, proof of actual effectiveness, say like the reliability of control methods, implanting thoughts, etc., is not demonstrated in Velminsky's sources. Often these are proposals, experiments with anecdotal or preliminary results, public displays of symbolic experiments rather than secret weapons or fully operational systems. Velminsky often treats some of it metaphorically, that is, seeing the research and technology as both literal scientific pursuits and as ideological myth-making, i.e. the idea that thought is electromagnetic, aura fields, etc., are as much about a symbolic cosmos as they are about physiology. And sometimes, in a way, the metaphor becomes the thing. This is how we perceive the movement and effect of thought sometimes, you know, as waves, as vibes, man, whatever you want to call it. Like, the model becomes the method sometimes. I don't know, a lot of what he mentions in his book, Homo Sovieticus, is, I would say, the applicable strategies gleaned from much of this research.
College over here.
Now, once you get outside of cell cultures, quote-unquote, and torsion field theory papers, and into the declassified files, rumors, and Monday morning quarterbacking, myth-making, popularization of stories, you start to get another level of this weird, spooky, ooky, gooky, dooky Soviet psychotronics stories. These tend to be more folkloric, anecdotal, or filtered through Western intelligence anxieties.
Real weird shit.
They're part of the texture of the field. And here are some of the stranger ones I found. There's the previously alluded to Nina Kulagina Heartstop story. Beyond her egg yolk demos, Nina Kulagina was rumored to have stopped a frog's heart at a distance. and there were whispers she could disrupt a human heartbeat. U.S. Army reports from the 1970s mentioned the possibility of her killing a lab frog, quote, by mental concentration, unquote. Intelligence sources treated it seriously enough to speculate about potential psychotronic assassination. What a time to be alive back in those days, man. Oh my God. If you were a Soviet-era Cold Warrior on either side, you were living in a fucking Nick Fury comic. The dying rabbit test. Ugh, God. Repeated in Western summaries. Soviet submariners were allegedly monitored for emotional reactions when their pet rabbits were killed back on land. Ugh, so many dead rabbits. Hate it. The idea was to test. Rabbits are a sacred animal to me. I have many totem animals, and rabbits happen to be one of them. The idea was to test non-local biocommunication, quote unquote. Never verified, but it circulated widely in Cold War sci literature as an example of quote unquote remote stress induction tests. Jesus. You have the 1990s experiments in Novosibirsk claimed that volunteers sitting inside giant spiraling aluminum Kozyrev mirrors reported visions of aliens, ghostly entities, or out-of-body experiences. Some reported telepathic contact with other participants in distant mirrors elsewhere. These were sometimes presented as continuations of earlier psychotronics ideas. You have the story of Kazdachev's quote-unquote death radiation. This is related to his cell-to-cell studies. And they allegedly found that when one culture was poisoned, the adjacent shielded cultures sometimes showed signs of illness as well. In later retellings, this morphed into the idea of a transferable death signal, a sort of psychic contagion. You get into the really weird Psychotronics era literature, go see my Zarg episode about Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden and some of his ideas. Just, god damn it, it just goes into weird fucking areas. You have psychic spies and quote-unquote black rooms. There are accounts that suggest KGB or military units maintain shielded black rooms, quote-unquote, for telepathy and psychotronic, basically Faraday cages. They had offices in Faraday cages for these experiments. Some Western analysts speculated they were testing electromagnetic mind control beams. Mind control!
Man, I got mind control over
Epstein Island. And there's stories about psychotronic generators the size of trucks that were circulated in NATO circles. Once again, this is also related to the rat-faced remote viewing guard dogs or attack dogs. There's a story of Wolf Messing, the stage mentalist. He claimed he once entered a Moscow bank with a slip of paper, hypnotized the cashier into handing him money, and returned it later as proof to Stalin of his abilities. He also claimed to have evaded arrest by making guards believe he had left the room. Soviet propaganda magnified these stories, giving him a spooky, ooky dooky aura as a state-endorsed psychic. Like, he was the, him and Nina Kulagina were like the gold standards. It was like, this is just our regular shit that you can know about. So if this is what we're letting you know about, imagine the shit that you don't know about. There are stories about biofields and corpses, some experiments in dermo-optical perception, aka skin vision, as mentioned before, and Kirlian photography allegedly involved photographing the aura, quote-unquote, of freshly deceased subjects. That means human beings. Later rumors claim scientists detected quote-unquote phantom limbs or quote-unquote energy silhouettes after death, which linked into mystical claims about the persistence of some life energy, once again, chi, ki, orgone, odic force, or the force from Star Wars, if you want to get really nerdy about it. Psychotronic warfare rumors. NATO analysts in the 1980s floated scenarios of the Soviets building, quote-unquote, beam weapons, lasers. Lasers, Michael. They're lasers. The 80s, once again, all about lasers. Lasers that could make enemy soldiers nauseous, panic-stricken, or even hallucinate. This fed into broader fears of quote-unquote psychoactive ELF weapons, extremely low frequency, or mind zap devices, even though no verifiable battlefield deployment was ever demonstrated. I don't know, look at the LRADs, long-range acoustic devices we have today. Once again, a lot of this shit came down to sound. Some Kulagina's frog experiments and Kazachev's cell studies have at least lab reports and film, quote-unquote, evidence behind them, though that is contested, obviously. Others, like the dying rabbit test or the Kozyrev mere alien visitations, are more anecdotal and bleed into conspiracy/legend and folklore. Western intelligence tended to inflate anecdotal Soviet work and potential military threats such as psychotronic beams and psychocorrection warfare. Now, this is tier 2 of the weirdness. The Cold War generated not only actual parapsychology experiments, but also an entire folkloric subculture of rumors, half-remembered quote-unquote leaks, outright urban legends and myths around Soviet psychotronics. These circulated in various formats such as UFO newsletters, samizdat, which is basically zines, secret zines, Western psychic warfare books, and even Soviet underground publications. This is just a small sampling, a schmatter, a schmear, if you will, of some of the weirder shit. There's the story of the Red Square energy vortex. Beneath Lenin's mausoleum, there was allegedly a psychotronic power plant designed to project calming and or manipulative frequencies over the crowds in Red Square. This was popularized in the 1980s through Western conspiracy zines and later in Russian mystic Moscow guidebooks. No evidence has ever been found. It ties into older stories about sacred ley lines under Moscow being weaponized by the state, etc. One of the crazier subdivisions of all this stuff is to talk of astral assassins of the KGB. Special Department 8 psychics. Anytime there's a group or institution called like Department 8 or Office 365, watch the fuck out, because there's some stanky ill shit connected to it. But anyway, Special Department 8 psychics trained to quote-unquote kill with thought or induce heart attacks in dissidents abroad. Some men who stare at goats type shit. That's the whole reason they were staring at them goats. To fucking make their heart stop, to kill them. But, this leaked in various emigre gossip and speculative U.S. Army reports on Soviet psychic warfare briefings from the 1970s. No confirmed cases, obviously, because they're fucking dead. No, but this obviously reflects misreadings of telepathy experiments meets Cold War paranoia. Soviet clairvoyants had successfully, quote-unquote, seen an alien base on the far side of the moon, and were briefing the Politburo. This is one of the fruits, quote-unquote, of their remote viewing adventures and forays. This appears in 1990s Russian UFO journals like Anomalia and English-language books on Soviet UFO research by the magnanimous Paul Stonehill. Man, that guy is one of the greatest Russian paranormal researchers. The man is a living encyclopedia of the strange and unusual. He's like another Charles Fort. One of my favorites. If you find anything by him, read it. He does a book with another dude named Philip Mantle on Russian USOs, SOs, water ships, etc. that I think deserves another look at in this time of UAPs and what we at least, quote-unquote, know of their capabilities as transmedium vehicles, air, land, and water, etc. There's the story of the KGB mummy room. Deep inside a Lubyanka sub-basement is a refrigerated chamber where the KGB stored, quote-unquote, psychically potent corpses, including Rasputin's severed hands,
And peanuts?
to extract bioenergy for their experiments. This originated from samizdat humor magazines like the Mad Magazine equivalent from Russia and emigre occult writers in the 1970s, though no evidence obviously exists, but it was popular in Russian fringe circles. There are psychotronic mind control broadcast urban legends. I mean, we just talked about one that actually happened, or at least is framed as being that, but this was a mass hypnosis framed as entertainment on television during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Soviet TV and radio towers carried subliminal or ELF messages to pacify the population, extremely low frequency. looking to harp all that shit. Like, it's all in the same wheelhouse. But this was especially during major political events. Western fringe newsletters like The Resonance from the 1980s and Russian postscripts to The Woodpecker, which is a Duga radar, or there was The Woodpecker and then the Duga radar signal, which shortwave listeners nicknamed the Russian Woodpecker. So, like, if you look into, not pirate radio, god damn it, what's it called? Like the ghost stations or whatever, these leftover number stations, they're called, that are thought to be running as for the purposes of international intelligence. These are codes, etc., or at least that's one way to frame them. They're often very eerie and strange. Like, they sound kind of like this. So yeah, that's a number station right there. There's also tales of the psychic cosmonaut. So cosmonaut doesn't say who, but one of them, at least one, trained in telepathy and was launched to secretly contact alien intelligences in deep space without radio. At least his mind was the radio. Russian UFO author Felix Ziegel's followers popularized this. It was also amplified by Western New Age press and is often linked to rumors about lost cosmonauts. So some of these psychic cosmonauts may have, said, okay, fuck it, I'm going with you guys. And that's what happened to them. Or stranger, who knows? Maybe some of these aliens they contacted are non-physical beings and possibly became possessed by the consciousness and returned to Earth and are working in the shadows to bang your girlfriend or something. I don't know. Who knows what they're up to? There's also, once again, the Kozarev mirrors and the alien summonings allegedly attached to these. In the 1990s, participants sitting inside a giant aluminum spiral reported visions of non-human entities and even instantaneous wormhole contacts with other planets. So whole entire other planets got up in their wormhole. Can you believe it? I mean, I don't know if I believe that, but something akin, maybe, possibly, who knows? When you're inside the twilight zone of the outer limits of the mind, anything can happen. This is based on real Kozarev mirror experiments in Novosibirsk, but exaggerated quite greatly in post-Soviet UFO magazines, and a mix of psychotronics, time physics, and shamanic cosmology. Shaman! There's also the Psychic Polar Station at a secret Arctic base. Soviet scientists tried to communicate with whales and polar bears telepathically and to use them as spies or biological sensors. Now, that sounds silly on the surface, but there are actually documented cases of the Soviets, or at least I think the Russians, this might be closer to contemporary today times, but using dolphins and whales for militarized purposes, whether it's communication relays or, I hope not, I don't know, bullet catchers or something. Jesus. Back flipper, back. Anyways. Western journalist Henry Griss's 1970 paperback about red psychic spies mentioned this, but it was never substantiated. But once again, we've got these newer stories about cetaceous, aquamarine, mammal communications, etc., which ties into Dr. John Lilly and all the weird shit he was doing. But there were eventual military applications to some of that shit, so who knows what weird avenues that branches off into. Let's see, we've got the Astral Linen Project. It's a mystical think tank attempted to create a psychic egregore of linen, an astral tulpa, if you will, to guide the revolution from beyond the grave. This actually stems from Russian occult fiction. It was often cited as if it was real in Western occultist circles. I could see that. I'm sure that during the Cold War there was some pack of, like, I don't know, edgy California occultists, like a group of wonderful wizards and warlocks fighting the evil, godless communists somewhere in a small, filthy section of California. Let's see, we've got the psychic sabotage of Chernobyl. Some post-Soviet conspiracy theorists claim that Chernobyl was quote-unquote psychically sabotaged by Western remote influencers or remote viewers, or a rogue Soviet psychotronic device backfiring. I believe Dr. Tom Bearden, Lieutenant Colonel, quote-unquote, Dr. Tom Bearden, Karate Man, talks about Zarg actually being attached to the sabotage of Chernobyl, maybe. I'm not sure. Discoveries behind the Iron Curtain, psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder. Seeded many rumors of this. Paul Stonehill and Philip Mantle's Russia's USO Secrets and the Soviet USO Files include post-Soviet retellings. And Henry Griss and Billy Dick's 1977, The New Soviet Psychic Discoveries, pushed some of the wildest claims out of all these. Russian magazines like Technika Moladeji or Youth Tech occasionally ran quote-unquote future science features that fed a lot of this kind of speculation. Samizdat occult journals, Paris Immigrant Press in the 1960s to 80s, such as Vestnik Roskogo Masonchestva, also spun stories of Rosicrucian / KGB hybrids, infiltration of the KGB by various quote-unquote sinister occult societies or magical groups. Even though 90% of this is likely bullshit, it shaped the Western imagination of psychotronic Russia. Military planners treated some as if plausible. Soviet youth wrote about bioenergetics and Kozarev's time physics in popular science magazines and added their own esoteric goals, and it created a fertile, very fertile, Cold War mythology that still echoes today. So that's going to be that's a long and short of it, of Soviet psychotronics. Now, next episode, we're going to get into what China was doing during this time, and presumably is still up to today. Once again, China's different. It's a whole different animal, a whole different beast. Their connections and interactions to the spiritual and the mystic are long established, well documented. But once again, when you're looking at everything through the Marxist materialist angle, it takes on some strange mutations. Marxist materialist mutations. So yeah, that's going to be it for this episode. I thank you very much for listening. My name is Michael Luck. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Give a like, leave a comment. If you know anything about aether vortex physics or torsion physics, etc., please let me know. Tell me, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because I can only juggle so many thoughts at once. But I love to learn more about this stuff. And I've got more books that I look forward to reading on this. Check out the sources in the show notes. There'll be some links to CIA documents. There'll be some links to Psychotronic Golgotha, so you can read the harrowing accounts of just what a hellish life some of these people have had to endure. No matter what the source is, just it's yikes. It is rough reading. So yeah, please tune in next episode next week for our look into Chinese parapsychology under the communist banner. And yeah, that'll be it for today. Thank you guys for listening. Love you all. Appreciate your likes, comments, tic tac, cling clong, bang bang, and all that. And we'll see you next week. Love you guys. Peace.
Bro,